Jury nullification is a legal doctrine both captivating and controversial. It empowers everyday people, summoned as jurors, to deliver a verdict rooted not only in fact, but also in moral or conscientious objection to a given law. Imagine stepping into a courthouse where you have the usual roles: prosecutors, defense attorneys, and a robed judge, yet the decisive authority rests with you and your fellow jurors. Most individuals understand their duty as jurors to be straightforward, weigh the evidence, determine guilt or innocence based on the facts as they align with the law, and follow the judge's instructions. However, embedded within centuries of Anglo-American legal tradition is the prerogative for jurors to refuse to convict if they believe the statute itself is unjust, oppressive, or incorrectly applied. This capacity to override the written law, even when it is clear a defendant violated it, constitutes jury nullification. Despite its longevity and significance, it remains an often misunderstood aspect of the legal system, one that has profound implications for justice, democracy, and civic responsibility. The historical fabric of jury nullification. To truly understand jury nullification, one must embark on a historical journey. The tradition can be traced to English common law, where juries functioned as shields against the Crown's excesses. One of the most cited episodes involves the trial of William Penn in 1670, when jurors defied the judge's instructions to convict Penn for unlawfully preaching a Quaker sermon. Despite facing imprisonment and intense judicial pressure, the jurors held firm to their conscientious stance, leading to Penn's acquittal. The principle that jurors could judge not only the facts, but also the law itself, became woven into the fabric of early American jurisprudence. This spirit of defiance later traveled across the Atlantic and found a home in the American colonies. Notable colonial cases saw jurors acquit defendants accused of violating laws that they believed contradicted fundamental rights, such as freedom of speech or freedom of assembly. By the time of the American Revolution, the idea that ordinary citizens on a jury possessed the authority to stand against oppressive statutes resonated deeply with people who had grown wary of distant, centralized power. Early founding-era judges and legal theorists debated the scope of this right, and while opinions varied, the notion that jurors might nullify laws they deemed unjust never wholly disappeared. Constitutional dimensions and debates. As the United States Constitution took shape, debates arose about how to balance the power of the judiciary, the legislature, and the people. The role of the jury was enshrined in the Sixth Amendment, reflecting the belief that a trial by one's peers would safeguard individuals from government overreach. Yet, the question of whether the jury should also serve as the final arbiter of a law's moral legitimacy has remained hotly contested. Some argue that the framers intended for jurors to interpret both fact and law, offering an essential check upon potentially tyrannical statutes. Others contend that while the Constitution guarantees the right to a jury trial, it does not explicitly sanction ignoring legal instructions from the bench. Modern courts generally prohibit judges and lawyers from directly informing juries about the possibility of nullification. Instruction to follow the law is regarded as a cornerstone of the judicial process, ensuring consistency and predictability. Nonetheless, the foundational premise that a jury's verdict cannot be overturned merely because jurors disagreed with the law effectively preserves jury nullification as a latent power. That tension between the ostensible directive to adhere to the law and the unspoken ability to reject it lies at the core of current debates over the doctrine. Philosophical underpinnings. Morality versus legality. At the heart of jury nullification is a philosophical quandary. Where do an individual's moral convictions intersect with the rule of law? The Western tradition has long wrestled with whether certain laws might be so unjust that they lose their moral authority. For example, thinkers from John Locke to Henry David Thoreau argued that obedience to the state must yield when statutes violate fundamental rights or moral imperatives. In the context of a jury trial, each juror must decide how to balance the desire for uniform justice relying on the consistent application of statutes and the pull of conscience, which might demand an acquittal in the face of a morally troubling law. By empowering ordinary citizens to uphold moral principles, Jury nullification provides a direct, if rare, mechanism for challenging laws widely perceived as unjust. Proponents of this view maintain that it is precisely the unpredictability and moral passion of a jury that preserves the law's ethical compass. Critics counter that permitting such a subjective power undercuts the rule of law, threatens uniform legal standards, and may enable bias to infiltrate the judicial process. Noteworthy cases and controversies. Throughout American history, there have been numerous instances in which juries employed nullification, whether openly acknowledged or discreetly implied. Prior to the Civil War, Northern juries sometimes refused to convict individuals prosecuted under the Fugitive Slave Act, viewing the law itself as unconscionable. In more recent decades, certain cases involving cannabis legislation have quietly sparked jury resistance, with some jurors finding the harsh penalties for nonviolent drug offenses disproportionate or inhumane. Yet, jury nullification can also take forms that provoke disquiet. Critics point out instances in which predominantly white juries acquitted defendants accused of committing crimes against black individuals during the Jim Crow era, choosing to nullify laws intended to protect victims of racial violence. Such episodes underscore the tension between moral conviction and prejudice, illustrating that nullification is not inherently righteous, but can be wielded in ways that perpetuate injustice. The role of the citizen juror. Citizen participation in the legal system through jury duty is often lauded as a cornerstone of democracy. The notion that everyday individuals can interpret complex evidence, weigh the credibility of witnesses, and deliver a binding verdict sets jury trials apart from inquisitorial systems in other parts of the world. Jury nullification pushes this citizen role further, implying that every juror carries the responsibility of assessing not only the defendant's guilt or innocence, but also the moral standing of the laws being enforced. This power, however, is shrouded in subtlety. Judges typically instruct jurors that they must follow the law as given, and attorneys who advocate explicitly for nullification risk contempt of court. Yet the fact remains that jurors cannot be penalized for delivering an acquittal, nor can their decision be overturned once rendered. As such, knowledge of this ability and the wisdom to apply it judiciously represents a meaningful facet of civic education. Ethical considerations and criticisms. Skeptics of jury nullification highlight several problematic aspects. They argue that inviting jurors to impose their personal values or moral judgments on legal proceedings can breed inconsistency and bias. One group's notion of justice may stand in stark contrast to another's, resulting in verdicts that feel arbitrary or discriminatory. Furthermore, from a strictly procedural standpoint, the legal system aims to treat similar cases similarly. Nullification disrupts that uniformity, introducing an element of unpredictability that challenges the principle of equality under the law. Despite these criticisms, advocates for jury nullification caution against equating conscientious objection with chaotic caprice. They suggest that a jury's occasional refusal to apply the law can serve as a societal alarm bell, signaling laws or legal practices that merit reevaluation. Historically, shifts in public sentiment have sometimes been reflected first in the jury box, nudging lawmakers to reconsider the statutes in question. In this sense, the moral convictions of a jury can catalyze legal reform from below, rather than merely waiting for top-down policy changes. Contemporary relevance and practical insight. In modern times, discussions about nullification often surface in cases touching on contentious social issues, drug offenses, immigration-related statutes, or mandatory minimum sentences. Occasionally, jurors who suspect that the penalty far exceeds the severity of the crime consider acquitting despite clear violations of the law. Such actions can act as a localized check on prosecutorial power, particularly in an era of high conviction rates and overburdened prisons. Even so, courts generally discourage explicit references to nullification. Defense attorneys must walk a fine line, hinting at the moral dimensions of a case without overtly instructing a jury to disregard the law. Potential jurors also encounter challenges. Revealing an inclination toward nullification during voir dire may lead to dismissal from the panel. This practical reality underscores the complex dance between the theoretical power of the jury to nullify and the procedural norms designed to curtail open invocation of that power, balancing conscience and legal uniformity. Ultimately, jury nullification stands as an embodiment of a deeper tension within any system of laws: the need to uphold consistent rules while also recognizing that moral considerations matter. In a vibrant democracy, law and morality often converge, but conflicts inevitably arise. The jury's ability to nullify is a testament to the trust that the founders and subsequent generations placed in the conscience of ordinary citizens. Through examining the history, philosophical justifications, constitutional debates, and modern implications of this power, we gain insights into the essence of justice itself. By delving further into this topic, one discovers an invitation to reflect on what it means to wield moral authority in the context of civic duty. Embracing the complexities of jury nullification does not demand taking a definitive stance for or against it. Rather, it requires recognizing the delicate balance that exists between following the law as a structured guide for fairness and acknowledging the higher principles that sometimes compel us to question or even defy it. Whether this balance fosters a more equitable society remains a subject of passionate debate, but the very fact that such debate exists reaffirms the enduring, pivotal role of the jury in the pursuit of justice.